I think this individual who committed some terrible, terrible crimes has not just repented, not just served his time and acknowledged his fault, but is now working to stop other young people going down the path that he went down. I think, as you know, Ed, I was a Justice Secretary. I think that the importance of contrition, forgiveness, rehabilitation, and repentance is absolutely critical. None of us should be defined by the worst thing that we've ever done.
Labour says Michael Gove bears responsibility for Britain's youth worklessness crisis, the rise in young people not in education, employment or training. The former Education Secretary has been at the centre of a political row this week after the current Education Secretary, Lucy Powell, accused his reforms of leaving some young people unprepared for work and the modern world. Gove was actually Education Secretary under David Cameron between 2010 and 2014, and I'm delighted that he joins me now. Welcome to the show, Lord Gove.
Hi, good morning, Ed. Lovely to be on your show.
Thank you for coming on. Were you surprised that Lucy Powell has decided that all the problems in education are down to an education secretary that left 12 years ago?
Not completely surprised. I've been a bogeyman for many people for many, many years. And in some respects, as a traditionalist, it's quite nice for Lucy Powell to revive the blame Gove culture in politics. The broader but more serious point is that the scandal that we have of 1 million people not in education, employment or training definitely requires attention. There are some things that Lucy Powell and Andy Burnham have said which may give some cause for hope. But if we're going to solve the NEET problem, we need to recognise that there are factors in the labour market, particular interventions that this government have made, that have exacerbated the situation. The number of people who were NEET was declining as a result of the changes that we made in education. And that in particular, the biggest worry that I have is that Lucy Powell will turn back the clock on some of the reforms that we made, which ensure that high-performing schools give students brilliant academic outcomes, which are the best inoculation against being NEET.
And so I sort of tried to kind of navigate a path between the discussion, as it were, that you had with Lucy Powell, the discussion between you and Lucy Powell and yourself, because you came back quite strongly and said, welcome back to stupid, in effect, which seemed to be a dismissal of technical education. But giving apprenticeships, technical education has been a problem that we have wrestled with in this country really since the Butler Act of 1944. So is there a happy medium? I thought I'd worked it out that your criticism was that technical qualifications are not good enough, and that there tends to be a sort of approach which says if you're not good enough for mainstream education, let's put you in this technical silo. Is there a way through to promote what we would loosely call technical education?
Yes, there is. So I am strongly in favour of high-quality technical and vocational education. The problem is that there's sometimes a confusion here, so that it is sometimes the case that the argument is made that there are some students who are, quotes, not academic, and it's assumed that they can't access an academic curriculum to the age of 16, and it's argued then that these students should have technical options. Then when those technical options are introduced and they're rigorous, as some are, and students also find them difficult, then those technical and vocational qualifications are made easier, but then rendered equivalent. And you end up with a situation which we had under the last Labour government, where you have a qualification and cake decoration that is the same as a maths GCSE, and that some of the qualifications that we used to have, which were badged as technical qualifications which were equivalent to academic for 16-year-olds, actually had a negative impact in the labour market, negative value. That meant that having these qualifications made you less employable than otherwise. Alison Wolfe, very distinguished professor, expert in vocational education, looked at this. As a result, we began to improve technical and vocational qualifications. The key concern that I have is that instead of improving technical and vocational education after the age of 16, what Lucy Powell and Andy Burnham appear to be suggesting is that we should prematurely write off some students before the age of 16 as incapable of getting good GCSEs in core academic subjects. And this has been a persistent problem in English education, where children have been written off prematurely. And the children who suffer most are children from working class and ethnic minority backgrounds, who suffer from what George W. Bush calls the soft bigotry of low expectations.
But is there still, just to kind of persist with this point, is there still a case where, the traditional education that you and I are familiar with, and I think we would say it hasn't really changed that much in the last 40 years, arguably 100. You could walk into a classroom today from the middle of the 1950s and see something potentially similar, is off-putting for a lot of bright children who just don't want that kind of education. They want to do practical stuff. I mean, we got rid of polytechnics and turned them into universities because it was deemed that polytechnics were less prestigious than universities. We now have some university technical colleges, perhaps not enough, that Ken Baker has promoted. Is there a way of highlighting the importance of technical education by bringing back polytechnics or promoting UTCs without throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
The single biggest barrier that we have in vocational and technical education is actually the involvement of employers. So apprenticeships are a really good thing. The principle that after the age of 16, once you've got an academic core, that you can have people who then earn and learn, that's really important. When people look at other countries like Germany or Switzerland and admire their vocational education system, what they're really missing is that employers there are directly involved, or not quite, it's not quite a compulsory system, but in effect it is, and that is the big difference. When it comes to what happens before the age of 16, we actually, as a country, England, outperform countries like Germany overall because we insist on an academic core to that point. Now, you're right that some aspects of education remain the same, but that's because the brain fundamentally benefits from the type of classical liberal education that you and I are familiar with. And this isn't simply an assertion from me or a dry exercise from some theoreticians. This is the lived reality of students in our very, very best state schools. And one of the things that I pointed out was that some of the free schools that we established, and indeed some academies and some existing comprehensives, succeed in getting 90% of students to get good GCSEs, students often from the most disadvantaged backgrounds who in other circumstances might be written off. And it's these schools that have the lowest NEET population. So you're right, I think, in your broad, sensible instinct that it shouldn't be either or. But my concern is specifically about making sure that children up to the age of 16 are taught the subjects that then give them the chance to choose their future.
Can I just change the subject, a slight crunching of gears? The story about Joshua Bonehill-Paine being selected as a Conservative council candidate has been dominating the airwaves. He was, of course, convicted of anti-Semitism, assaulting a police officer. He actually went to prison. Can you defend that? Can the Conservatives defend selecting him? It seems to me that, as somebody has pointed out on the text, you can be a former neo-Nazi and be a Conservative candidate, but you can't be in favour of net zero and be a Conservative candidate. That's an extraordinary position for the Conservative Party to be in.
I think this individual who committed some terrible, terrible crimes has not just repented, not just served his time and acknowledged his fault, but is now working to stop other young people going down the path that he went down. I think, as you know, Ed, I was a Justice Secretary. I think that the importance of contrition, forgiveness, rehabilitation and repentance is absolutely critical. None of us should be defined by the worst thing that we've ever done. The second thing is that if you are going to have a political party overall, a leader will set the direction, and it's expected, I think, for anyone who aspires to be a parliamentary candidate, that they're part of that team. And in the case of Kemi Badenoch, she's made it clear, just I think in two areas. One is with respect to the European Convention on Human Rights, where, again, the change that she calls for would be required in order to safeguard our borders. But here you have an individual who has not just served his time, but is committed to putting right his sins.
Let's hear what Kemi Badenoch said on the BBC this morning.
It is a local platform looking at parking, sorting out bins. That's what councillors do. It's not a national platform.
So local councillors don't really count in the eyes of the Conservatives. You can select who you like because it doesn't really matter.
No, local councillors count enormously. I think the point that Kemi was making there is that in August we're having a national conversation about a local council candidate, but local councils do matter, and the choice that we put before the electorate in every electoral contest matters. But I don't think that anyone looking at Kemi Badenoch's record could suggest for a moment that she was soft on anti-Semitism. She has, of all the party leaders in the country at the moment, demonstrated the greatest degree of robustness in helping the Jewish population against the anti-Semitism we face.
I think that's been acknowledged, but a lot of Jewish communities have come out and said how concerned they are about this. The other point is Kemi Badenoch said in terms of Louise Haigh, who of course has a conviction for fraud, that we need more conviction politicians, not convicted politicians. Is the Conservatives now going to stop attacking Louise Haigh, given who they're now selecting as their candidates?
Well, here I do take a slightly different line. Again, I think that Louise Haigh, whatever the circumstances in the past, it's in the past. I strongly believe that you should allow people who have made mistakes in the past to contribute in the future. The idea that a past error acknowledged and repented of should be a barrier to future public service, I think is completely wrong. I think that, whether or not you've got a religious background or faith or whatever, the idea that people can't change or improve is fatal for society. The ability to be able to understand the circumstances in which someone finds themselves, recognise human weakness and frailty, and accept that people want to do better, I think that is absolutely critical. So I can understand in the rough and tumble of politics why people will have a go at Louise Haigh for that, but I wouldn't.
Is that your message to Gavin Barwell, who lost the whip, and Grant Shapps, a cabinet minister who now cannot be selected as a Conservative candidate, that there is a path to redemption?
Well, in both cases, that's a matter of political disagreement. So in both cases, Gavin, I don't know about Grant, and I think that the point has been made that the party doesn't comment on individual cases, but both Gavin and Grant are friends of mine, so it's very difficult to get into abstract arguments about people whom I like very, very much. I like Gavin enormously. I think he has an enormous amount to offer. There's a political disagreement. Political organisations have to have some sort of boundary. I would hope that in the future that Gavin will continue to play a really important role in public life. And
finally, Michael, just another, Rod Liddle was a great presenter on Times Radio, a great columnist for The Spectator. Just want to get your thoughts quickly. Very sad that he has died earlier this week.
I think we're both absolutely devastated. You've been filling in on Rod's slot on Times Radio, and you know that he's been ill for a while. He naturally wanted privacy, and none of us expected that the illness would lead to his early death. It's a tragedy. He's one of the most brilliant writers in the English language at the moment. I mean, he's a brilliant satirist and truth teller, someone who pushed the language and pushed argument as far as it would go in the service of truth and in the service of making readers of The Spectator and listeners to Times Radio enjoy and feel illuminated by the events of the day. It's for those of us at The Spectator, and I know for people at Times Radio, it's just immensely sad that we've lost him far too soon.
Absolutely. Michael Gove, former Conservative Cabinet Minister and editor of The Spectator, thank you for coming on the show.